Welcome to another edition of Dan Frequently Asked Questions. In this edition, we're going to do something unusual. We're going to make you part of unraveling the mystery of what happened in this scenario. So let's call this What Happened. Keep watching. Okay, so here it is. A diving instructor sent us this. I find that after almost every dive I go diving, I'm exhausted with a headache. I find this particularly on boat dives. Not sure why. Remember that one. I'm certified as a PADI Tech 50 diver, but often do recreational dives or teach recreational divers. I know I should drink more water, but typically only take about a liter during the dives I do. Are there any medical conditions I should consider, and should I see a doctor about them? Because it has become a nuisance to me. For example, today I guided 2 fun dives, of which the maximum was 15 meters for about 40 minutes, with an hour surface interval in between. And I had lunch, water and fruit before I did the second dive. But by the time I got home, which was around 1 o'clock, and finished with all my stops and duties, and got home at 3:30, my head was in a lot of pain and my stomach started to hurt. I tried to eat some food and drink water and have a shower, but I had nothing to kill the pain, and I took a nap, but it only got worse. Now, I do suffer from tension headaches and feel that this may be part of it, and they appear to be becoming more frequent. Are you got any suggestions about that? Oh, and by the way, I took an allergy pill, and that does seem to have helped. Remember that one as well. I looked at your article about headaches and diving, and it also happens to be allergy season. So definitely there may be something else going on. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I had suspected skin bends once, but it went away after a few hours and was only a small rash, so I didn't have it assessed to go to hospital. Again, it was suspected but never confirmed to be related to the diving profile. What should I do? So that's a typical question that we get as diving doctors, and we need to start teasing this apart. So let's look at the facts. We've got a diver that on every dive, an instructor that on every dive has tiredness and headache developing, particularly on boat dives. But even on shallow dives, there is a tiredness and a fatigue. There is a background of allergy that was treated, and now there was this headache that was persistent. And there was one episode of a skin rash that occurred, and let's say, for argument's sake, it was the form of skin rash that we attribute to potential decompression illness. What is the scenario we're looking at here? All right, let's start off with what is the issue with feeling tired and getting a headache after being on a boat, even before diving? Well, that is a classic sign of motion sickness. The motion sickness often presents even before you get the sense of nausea and vomiting, with hypersalivation, so a more spit forming, if you like, and a headache. Because in part, you start breathing abnormally, and also the various neurological things that happen in the brain when you develop motion sickness include widening of blood vessels that will lead to the headache. All right, so let's put that aside. Now, with that background, this individual went diving, and even with shallow dives, they developed a headache. They had had at least reasonable fluid intake, reasonable food intake, and nevertheless had malaise and a sense of being unwell afterwards, including a headache that was not resolving on its own. Well, we would typically call this constitutional decompression illness. In other words, where there was an amount of bubbles that circulated and led to the body almost developing a flu-like syndrome. But for this to happen, we would usually expect a deeper dive. How would this happen at a shallow dive? Well, that's what brings us to the last bit of the puzzle. There was an episode in which there was a skin rash that, let's take the probability that this was indeed decompression related, and it was cutis marmorata. So taken together, shallow dives leading to bubble-related malaise and a skin rash occurring would make me suspect a shunt either in the heart or the lung, meaning that even trivial amounts of bubbles can cause disturbances of the neurological system, even though it's relatively minor bubble dispersion in the brain, and therefore only leading to a sense of tiredness, but also headache. And we know that when bubbles go through the circulation of the brain, afterwards the vessels dilate and they may indeed cause a bit of a headache. And if we have a skin rash such as this, and especially if it occurs after shallow diving, we would expect a possibility of a patent foramen ovale or a shunt in the lung. So my advice to the instructor is maybe you have been diving a little bit much for one, and you need to just give yourself a bit of a break. That would be a good thing, because a lot of things become conditioned responses, and every time we dive, we reinforce that. We've had people that put a face mask on and immediately vomit, simply because they've become conditioned that whenever they go diving, they get motion sickness. So that's something that should fade out. But if this is a vulnerability to decompression illness due to a shunt in the heart or a shunt in the lung, that needs to be examined. Now, the stomach symptoms that you described could have been food poisoning, or they could have been related to something you've eaten. But if there is the addition between shallow diving and bubble formation and malaise, together with a skin rash, I'd want to exclude a possible patent foramen ovale. So I would recommend you seek a doctor that is able to do that, and you can always call Dan and we can assist with referring you to a cardiologist that is able to do that. And I would certainly recommend you get that checked out, particularly before you take on deeper diving. As far as taking antihistamines, remember that there are two classes. The antihistamines that help with motion sickness are typically more sedating. They have to be, otherwise they wouldn't work within the centers of the brain associated with motion sickness. But the downside is that you are more sedated underwater, can get more nitrogen narcosis, and it may in fact result in breathing less, skip breathing, and a headache. If you take some of the other agents that are useful for motion sickness, such as Stugeron and less sedating antihistamines, they may be effective, particularly for the allergies you mentioned, and if the sinuses are involved with the headaches, then it would help for that. But I suggest that you first get the more serious things addressed, and after that, we might explore the less significant ones or the ones that don't repeat regularly. Well, I hope that's answered the question for the instructor that asked, but I also hope that those of you that were just listening in on this story, that it also brought out some significant aspects of diving that may be relevant to you as well. Until next time, therefore, safe diving.